Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you're located. Welcome to the third edition of our ZTNA Table Talks. I'm Ixa Gerard, and I'm very happy to have you all join us today in our monthly webinar series, where we delve into the world of Zero Trust Network Access. Today's session is titled Unlock Enhanced Network Security, Cloak All Resources with Single Pack Authorization. We will explore this topic in depth, providing valuable insights from our ZTNA experts presenting today, Jim Anthony, SVP of Field Engineering, Justin Yentile, Director of Sales Engineering, and Gernot Hacker, Senior Solution Architect. Before we kick off, a couple of things to note. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive the recording within 24 hours. If you have any questions, please submit them via the Q&A panel, and we'll try to answer them during the live session. If we can't get to you to answer your question during the session, someone will follow up with you via email. There is the option to request captions on your menu bar. If you need translated captions, you may also select the option within the captions request option. Now this part will be in Spanish. Si usted requiere de subtítulos, los puede habilitar en el botón de Request Captions en la barra de menú. Without further delay, I'll pass it over to Jim.
Thank you, Ixta, and thanks everyone for taking a few minutes to join us today. This is our third version of the Table Talks webinar series. It is March, so we're doing these once per month. Today's topic is a little technical, so it could be a little dry. We'll try to keep it fun and light, but hopefully you can walk away with some good information. There's not a lot of people in the industry that are doing this. So it'll probably be fairly unique, if you've never really investigated AppGate, or if you're not an AppGate customer. So this will be interesting and unique stuff. So I've got two of the best guys on the team with me to help guide us through this topic. So without further ado, let's get going. As Ixta said, you've got on the call myself, Jim Anthony. I'll be running the roundtable conversation today. With me, I've got Gernot. He's going to be my technical demo master. So we're going to flip screen a couple of times and let Gernot demo a couple of ideas and concepts to us. And of course, Justin's going to dig a little deep on some of the use cases and some of the details behind what single packet authorization actually does. So let's go. Table of contents, right? So the first thing we're going to talk about is the definition of SPA, and we're going to start with a little history lesson. So Gernot, I know you've been doing a little research on single packet authorization. You've been living it for the last decade or so. Why don't you walk us through some of how single packet authorization got started in the market, what some of the ideas were that led to the development of SPA, and some of the other ideas that you're kicking around with the history.
Sure, thanks, Tim. Hi, everyone from my side as well here. And yeah, how did SPA come along? So what I found actually, the first mentioning of the rough concept, despite not having the name yet, was in early 2000 in some German Linux user groups where some chaps were having a conversation saying, well, wouldn't it be nice not to simply announce our web servers publicly, directly attackable? How about we would have some magic sesame open before you actually are able to access a service? And that's what they came up with. And the first kind of implementation of that was showing up in 2006 in a Nintendo SNS game. And it's kind of like that, right? If you don't have the SPA key, door won't open. If you have it, it will. So that's the rough idea.
So in this case, the SPA key was the dance.
Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah.
Got it.
Sadly, we're missing the music on that, but it's what it is, right? You can't have everything. Well, then after this discussions going on, some user groups, first papers have been published in some universities over where you sit in the US, discussing the theme of something like port knocking. It's all the general direction, right? And then followed by that, those papers had been published by some Linux magazine, so it was definitely an insider thing. And well, eventually in 2013-ish, if I remember correctly, a first implementation in a Linux package firewall, a knocking port was implemented. And it's still around, as a matter of fact, but it's something that is unique in a way that it's barely scaling and you can do it. And I actually found if you go for OpenWRT, like an open source alternative firmware for wireless network routers, there you can have that package open. Will only help you at home because this is nothing we could use in an enterprise, not even as an MB. It's like a single solution for individuals, basically, right? But then we kicked in a way, right? So in 2016, in AppGate, in our product back then, it was called XDP. We actually implemented in SPA in an enterprise-grade product. So that's in a nutshell. So it's around for quite some time, although it's barely known, and we're doing it for nearly 10 years in an actual product, right? And that was a very brief history of SPA.
That's awesome, Gernot. Thank you for driving us through that. I think from now till the end of this webinar, one of the important concepts is to think about how this 2016 implementation of STP on the AppGate side took the port knocking idea and really created a wrapper around it, if you will, to enable it as an enterprise solution. I think that's really part of what we need to drive toward to help people understand what that really looks like. So that's good stuff. Thank you for that. So back to the table of contents. Next on the agenda, let's have a quick discussion on, how does the single packet authorization concept actually work? What's happening behind the scenes? And then maybe let's dive a little deeper on the AppGate implementation of single packet authorization. So I'm going to lean on Justin to walk us through this concept. So I think this first slide, Justin, is a generic conversation around what single packet authorization, i.e. port knocking, is doing. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right, Jim. So, really what we want to do here is kind of lay the framework of what goes into single packet authorization. And, a lot of these specifications were defined by the Cloud Security Alliance in terms of what a software-defined perimeter solution should have entailed. And anyway, so the whole point here was to hide a TLS service on the network. And so essentially, there was with the based on the specifications, there would only be one single TCP socket that would be visible on essentially the server side. And this helps to protect against the SSL and TLS vulnerabilities and DDoS and so forth. And in order to set this up, the first thing that would occur is that we need to distribute a seed from the controller to the other servers in the collection, essentially. And that occurs during your initial setup. And then if we move forward from there, Jim, there would be a client onboarding process where also the client needs a seed. And so essentially all of these entities need to have the ability to communicate secretly with one another using these seeds. And moving forward from there, the next thing that would actually occur in order for a client to begin establishing a communication with one of these servers is the client would open a TCP connection to the gateway and controller, but that very first message needed to be this specially crafted packet. And if we forward from there, Jim, so the client would send a SPA packet over, and that would consist of three essential elements of information. You can see these listed here. And essentially, these pieces of information would include this kind of secret information, as well as some other data that would make the packet unique and also not replayable. And once the packet gets accepted by the server, essentially the server is able to validate that it has been generated using that initial seed that the controller or the server knew about in the first place. Then we would be able to establish a TLS connection mutually between the two. And mutual TLS is an important bit there, where both the client and the server are essentially validating that each other is who they claim to be.
So Justin,
that's kind of
this is interesting. Mm-hmm. I see a couple of flaws in here, though. So, I mean, it's a good generic approach, but what's wrong with it? How did we take it to the next step here at AppGate?
Yeah, it's a great question. So AppGate has taken and enhanced the single packet authorization concepts with some proprietary enhancements. And so the first things first is that all ports are cloaked, and not even a single TCP packet would be visible, or socket would be visible. In AppGate's world, the appliances are listening for incoming messages on UDP ports 53 and 443. And so these ports are used exclusively for receiving SPA messages. No replies will ever be sent from them. So in other words, if you were to run a port scan against the perimeter of these the networks running these appliances, you will not see any listening ports, because if something doesn't respond to you, it becomes very, very difficult to detect that it's there. And so in addition to that, though, the SPA messages are also encapsulated inside of real layer 5 messages to ensure that modern firewalls will allow them. And so specifically, if you notice UDP port 53 and UDP 443 traditionally would be used for DNS and DTLS respectively. And so essentially that's how AppGate is able to get around some challenges with modern firewall engines. Second thing that AppGate has done to enhance the single packet authorization specifications is we can help to prevent piggybacking of devices on a NATed network. So essentially, while those incoming ports are listening for those two UDP packets, after that SPA transaction takes place on the UDP service, there would be a subsequent local TCP port 443 that gets opened up on the appliance. And obviously, if I were sending that message, if my client were sending a SPA message to those UDP ports from a network on which I am NATed behind a firewall, and there are other devices on that firewall, we need to worry about this piggybacking concept where another device might try to ride that essentially open connection now. And so AppGate has enhanced that by performing a second SPA transaction on that TCP port to ensure that only authorized devices can connect.
Interesting.
Yeah. And the third way that AppGate has enhanced this is to provide some spoof protection. So essentially, there are no static keys. We've implemented a mechanism in which there are evolving keys that are going to take place here. So there's never going to be anything that's static, and this is going to help to prevent man-in-the-middle and replay spoofing type of attacks. And then the fourth thing is isolated key distribution. So each entity that needs to communicate with something else. So each AppGate client, as well as each AppGate appliance, which we're going to talk more about a little bit later on, that needs to communicate securely with something is going to open up the SPA message. He's going to use SPA to open up their communication. And each one of those entities has a different key, essentially, for each interaction. And then finally, we also employ some DOS mitigation here by sheer nature of using UDP, as well as some of the way that our appliances are created here, where essentially UDP packets obviously can be processed at much higher rates than TCP ones can. So even when you're getting a flood of DOS packets, over 1 million packets per second, AppGate SDP will continue to operate. And in the TCP world, you're subject to a degradation of performance around 2,000 packets per second or so. So it's orders of magnitude greater mitigation against DOS types of challenges there.
Interesting stuff. Seems like a lot of work has gone into thinking about this port knocking concept and applying it to the AppGate SDP product and making it commercially viable, scalable, working in a lot of different corporate environments. Kudos to the team that put this together, and thank God you guys are on the call with me. In my attempt at humor there.
Yeah.
All right, let's keep going. Back to the table of contents. So we've discussed the definition of SPA and the history and some of the technical things. Let's pull the conversation up a little bit and talk about some benefits and maybe even some consequences of having SPA versus not having SPA. So first of all, Gernot, help the audience understand, why do I need SPA? What are we talking about actually? What's the reason behind putting this into the product itself?
Yeah, well, obviously it's all about protecting your networks, right? And basically no week goes by we don't hear if some kind of product was intercepted again. And this increased significantly over the last year or two, right? And so the relevance of SPA here is clearly that, although especially after the years we had beyond us in the early 20s, right, that you need remote connectivity, be it into cloud environments or on-premise environments, kind of cloaking this entry point into your secured networks is a very key thing to have. And that is exactly what SPA gives you, right? There are multiple products out there that offer you commercial services to scan your own systems, like white hacking, right? White hat hacking. And on the other hand, also databases where you can find regularly scanned wide ranges of the internet, where you see published which systems are out there that can be detected on a network. And that's always the first step. When you can detect something, you actually are most probably able to find an attack vector based on that as well. You can find out in some instances what product is listening out there, is out in the open. And so not showing up on the literal radar of port scans out there is a major benefit, obviously, right? And this is what SPA can give you. It can hide your environment from the internet.
Interesting. So the idea, I guess, is if you can't find it, you can't attack it.
Exactly. What you can't see, you can't hit.
Okay. That's fair enough. So now I think I understand why I need SPA. Well, what happens if I don't have it?
Well, that was for me as well, I guess, right? It's basically the same, right? If you don't have it, guess what? You're visible. I mean, obviously with website, that's not avoidable. That's unavoidable, right? So those things have to be protected differently. Nevertheless, there is an abundance of products out there giving you remote connectivity, right? And most of them had some kind of vulnerabilities, even rather major ones, up to the degree where, especially in the US, government agencies were in our industry on a large scale, incredibly short amount of time. There was like barely a week time's notice where they had to take a specific product offline because it was considered a high impact entry vector in your network, right? And this is obviously something that's hard to argue against, right? If your systems are out in the open, they are prone to attacks. And if you're unlucky enough using a system like that, maybe it's a large enterprise that has, I don't know, hundreds of boxes out there. That's a pain to patch those, right? And
Yeah.
this is what we see basically every week.
So this really drives home the point that if open ports are exposed to the public internet, there's some situations where you can't avoid it, like websites. You've got to expose TCP 443 or 80 if it's unencrypted, so that the public or the unauthenticated user can access those services. But there's other things out there like VPNs and other entry points to networks. I think that's really critical. The way that they work, they just expose their port and they rely on authentication to provide that connectivity. But because it's exposed, it means that also unauthorized people can actually connect to those services and attempt to exploit them in some way. That's an interesting idea. Um, Thank you, Gernot, for that. And let's keep trucking along here. So back to the table of contents, right? So let's think about a demonstration now. So um, perhaps we can take a look at how SPA provides a level of protection both before authorization and after authorization. I think, Gernot, you're prepared to do a little demo. We've got an IP address on the screen. It happens to be one of the gateways in our demonstration environment. We call it a collective, the demo collective. Um, let's take a look. Gernot, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but let's take a look and see on a machine that you might have available what ports are exposed on that IP address, and then let's look at it after authorization and make sure that you're still connecting to the right thing. Is that a fair demo?
Let's do that. Absolutely. Coincidentally, I have something ready where I can show that. Who would have thought that, right? So let's just see that I get you visual on that and get over to my screen.
Gotcha.
So,
Yep, we see it.
what you're seeing here is basically 3 terminal sessions. And on the right-hand side, you see the currently suspended AppGate client. So Jim showed you that IP address already. And then those 3 windows up there, you see exactly those. So here you see a command that I run that basically says, do every second this command to see if something has a connection from this system to that IP address. So I'm going to fire that right away. And right now there is no connection. So this will refresh every second. So the second line here is basically Nmap, which is a tool to scan for open ports and even for vulnerabilities of systems running there. It gives you means to detect if a specific version of an operating system is running, if something is announcing a service. And this SU means scan for UDP. And for ports 53443 on that IP address, it's what we use. So even with us knowing that this system is out there, we won't be able to see it and then reduce that to this port so that it's not taking ages. And then on the last screen here, I got a command that shows you what's going on any network card, also searching for the IP address. That I'm going to fire as well. So this is going to run in the background, and you're going to see some movement here and there eventually. But let's just fire off that command here now. So an Nmap will now try to connect to that system on UDP 53 and 443. And that's what you're seeing down there. Here you see this system is calling out to that IP address there. And it tries to echo it, it tries to ping it, but it ends up with a result saying, well, you gave me the IP address, but there is nothing there, right? So that was the UDE portion of that. And you can basically do the same on TCP. And there we have 443 only. So I got that one down and do that. And that's the same like connecting via HTTPS on TCP 443. And you also see 0 hosts up. And also on the top screen, you didn't see any movement. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to start off the AppGate client, which will connect amongst other systems to that system. Now you see some movement in the bottom screen, and now you see more or less immediately up here, this system connected on 443 and has established a connection. So although Nmap wasn't able to find anything, obviously there's something out there. And this is SPA at work, right? So this was hiding, it couldn't be found, but as soon as I connected through the AppGate client with our system, it immediately got the connection and it's established that. And yeah, we have this secure connectivity. And again, on the bottom here, you see just some movement regarding packets being pushed forth and back between my system and that system out there.
Perfect. So now that you're authorized to communicate to that 52.3.143.148, if you were to run that nmap command again, would you see those UDP and TCP ports open from your device's perspective?
Technically, I should be. So if I run that again, now you see there's another connection set up, and this is not going to be able to sustain a connection because technically I have this connection open. Obviously, there is a listener on that service. So it receives those packages, and Nmap will eventually say there is something, but it can't make any of that, which doesn't affect the connection I have with the AppGate system. But you see that movement up there, right? There's permanently stuff. There's this established session that stays, and this is Nmap doing its thing and trying to get through that and establish another connection, which it cannot do, right? Looks irritating. And here you see now it sees one host is up. Yeah, because I'm obviously connected, right? But it can't do anything beyond that. It won't be able to find anything that's running on that system, right? So if we go up there, it might even show, yeah, it says incomplete results. So it can't make any of that, right? So couldn't find anything. This means in Nmap, basically, there is port 443 TCP open, and TCP wrap means there seems to be something, but I really can't say what it is, right? It's completely obfuscated, although I have this connectivity now, right? So it's a pretty watertight system.
All right. Well, I think that's a pretty interesting quick demo, Gernot. Thank you for walking us through that. So just to recap, while I grab the screen share again, I think what Gernot showed us was while he's not authorized to communicate with that 52.3.143.148 gateway, he tries to do various commands against it. No ports appear to be open. In fact, his commands seem to think that there's no destination on that IP address. There's no available server. And then yet, by simply activating the AppGate client, which does the authorization under the covers for him to communicate to it, suddenly various ports are open that are being provided by that AppGate gateway. Hopefully that made a lot of sense. And if not, you can hit us with some questions. We'll hit them on the Q&A at the end of the session. So let's keep going. Back to the table of contents. Single packet authorization. We've now seen the demonstration. So let's talk about single packet authorization as it applies to an AppGate deployment. What does that look like? I'm going to lean back on Justin for this. Let's talk about SPA's use and the various appliances that make up an AppGate collective, if you will. Justin, tell us about that.
Yeah, sure. So basically, SPA is used, as we've kind of implied, it's used across the board from client connectivity to reach the servers, the AppGate appliances, that is, as well as for appliance to appliance communication. So this is going to help to prevent the appliances, obviously, from unauthorized use, as Gernot very eloquently demonstrated there. You could see that there was absolutely no way that you could receive a response back from doing a port scan against those appliances without the proper SPA messages being sent there. And really the same thing kind of applies across the board. AppGate has an AppGate collective will have a number of different types of appliances. And essentially, all of those appliances need to be able to communicate back to the controller itself, which is really the brains of our solution. And so we use SPA for allowing gateways to receive that information back from the controller. We also allow for controllers to communicate with other controllers using SPA. Log forwarders and log servers are all going to use SPA to establish their connection back to the controllers. So now it gets a little bit different though when we talk about some of the other appliances that can be in an AppGate collective. And so if we have an AppGate connector deployed, and if you're not entirely familiar, AppGate connectors can allow you to extend the functionality of our solution to support additional use cases like branch office connectivity back to a home office or a data center. It can allow for connectivity to and from things like IoT devices securely. And so connectors are essentially a network abstracted appliance that exists on behalf of those devices that are near it as a client. And so those connectors need to be able to communicate as an appliance to the controller to receive their instructions as an appliance. But also each of the instantiated clients that run on that connector need to also use SPA to communicate back to the controllers. And so those connectors are actually going to have several different SPA keys for each of these different messages that need to be established. And really kind of the same thing applies with our clientless portal. Our clientless portal is effectively an appliance that allows for a user from a web browser to open up a connection. And that clientless portal will use SPA on behalf of each of those user sessions to establish their connections back to the controllers and to the various gateways that the client needs to connect to. It is important to note, actually, though, that the clientless portal, because of the functionality of the way that it works, obviously there needs to be an open listening web port. So if you do run a port scan against a clientless portal, you will actually find TCP 443 open and listening. But the important bit here is that the clientless portal itself, if it were ever DOSed for any reason or anything like that, it itself is isolated from the rest of your AppGate collective, so you would not have any performance degradation against the other appliances in the collective, like the controllers and the gateways and so forth. So clientless portals is just the nature of how they work. Obviously, we need to allow an open web port because your web browser is not going to be able to initiate that SPA message that we need to send in order to enable SPA. And then we can, yeah. And so in AppGate, we can also define distinct connection profiles. And this can allow you to define different SPA settings for each different type of user or group of users or different locations within your organization. In general, you're not going to manage SPA on a per user basis, but you might define a different SPA key for different entities. So for example, if you work with, let's say, 2 different partners and you have internal users, you might define 3 different SPA keys to support that, where your internal users, you're going to use essentially one SPA key, and the 2 different partners would use different SPA keys from anyone else. And that way there, if you ever sever ties with one of those partners, you can very quickly and easily disable that partner's SPA key, and they wouldn't even be able to see your appliances anymore, let alone try to authenticate. And so that's really kind of the gist of how we use SPA within AppGate.
So Justin, talk to me real quick about these different connection profiles or SPA keys. How are they managed? Do the end users need to install them in their AppGate clients, or can we, as administrators of the environment, can we push them to the users? How does that work?
Yeah. So in most cases, when AppGate clients are deployed, assuming we're using the full AppGate client, you're going to push out that client with the configuration information already specified in it. So it's going to have what we call a client profile in AppGate terms. And that client profile will contain information like the URL that it needs to know to reach the AppGate controllers. It'll have a SPA key that would be used initially. It'll have information about the identity provider that will be used for authentication. And so that's usually deployed initially, using tools like Intune or SCCM to your internal devices. AppGate also has the ability, though, for you to allow your users to install a generic AppGate client, and you can provide them with a very one-click easy way to install that profile information. But after the SPA key is deployed onto those endpoint devices, should we need to or want to change those SPA keys out, we can very easily do that centrally via policy and kind of automate that type of stuff.
Okay. So one more quick question. So even though I've created a SPA key and I push it out to, say, a particular group of users, is that SPA key exchange between each of those users and the appliances? Is it the same bits of data that's flying across the wire? or are they still somehow unique between those users in that same group? Tell us about that a little bit.
No, there's as I mentioned earlier, there's automated key rotation, so the underlying key will be rotated regularly. So there's never the same bits of information that are flying towards the AppGate servers at any given time. We also use a time-based hash for sending that message. So essentially, the message that's received between the client and the server, if it ever is replayed, would not work. Essentially, a SPA message that is sent from one entity to another becomes invalid immediately after it was sent, essentially.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Well, I think we've had a pretty detailed conversation, even though we didn't take a lot of time to go through this today. But, I think the bottom line is you got something to think about here. It's time to start thinking about protecting your networks with SPA, right? We created a little analogy. I think Justin uses this analogy probably more than Gernot or me. Give us the visual, Justin. Let's take this as a walk away. Help us create a way that we could describe this, to our spouse if they asked what we attended that webinar for today.
Yeah, so sure, Jim. So I like to imagine that. Imagine your neighborhood, right? You have a house on a street, and on that street there are many other houses. And as you walk up that street, you walk past all of the other houses, and you can see a front door. And if I were a solicitor or a bad guy, I could walk up to any of those front doors, and I might not have the key to get in through that front door, but I can try to pick the lock, or I can try to break the window on the front door, and I can try to gain entry to that home. And that's a reality today with modern networking technologies. We got to worry about these sorts of things, right? And so, but then when we get up a little further up the street, we reach my house. And my house, when you look at the front of it, there is no front door that anybody can see. Unless I have a SPA key, that is. And so if I have the SPA key, I can see the front door. It gives me the ability just to see the front door. Now, when I walk up to that front door, there's still going to be a doorknob with a lock on it and a deadbolt that's locked. And I need to have the proper keys to those things before I can actually open the door and cross the threshold. But SPA is going to make that front door completely invisible. And the analogy for those keys and deadbolts there, by the way, is the other layer is obviously I need to also be authenticated as a user. And so even if you have this SPA key, the whole point is that it doesn't give you the ability to enter the building. You still need to have the proper credentials to get across the threshold and actually walk in the door. And so it kind of works like magic, and Jim likes to say it's like platform 9 3/4 in the Harry Potter franchise. You basically, you have to be a wizard to really see the front door there and actually enter it. So that's our little analogy for today. And, hopefully that helps you to kind of frame up why SPA is important and put it into perspective.
That's a couple of great takeaways from the webinar today. Thank you, Justin, for that. We do have a couple of questions that have come in, mostly centered around the different SPA modes that are available in an appliance. So this is a very specific AppGate question. We do make different modes available. Can we have a quick discussion about those 3 modes? What are those 3 modes for? Why do they exist? How do they behave? What's different about these different modes within the AppGate world? Gernot, you want to help us with that?
Yeah, so that comes partially from also when you start working with the system to maybe be able to test it. So what we see mostly when we start implementing the product is that people say, oh, that's not working, that's not working. When I started working for AppGate, the first few weeks, I nearly heard every day it's always DNS. Turns out it really, really very, very often is DNS. Something's not working out well, right? And this is also true for AppGate, obviously. Also with AppGate, based on this keys being used, time synchronization is key. And then, obviously, our major party pieces not being visible on the network. So try pinging a system that is designed not to work, right? And so one reason for being able to turn down those features a bit is to have at least an active TCP listener to see with a netcat if you can actually connect to a system from a routing perspective, right? Very basic troubleshooting, but it's what's required in networking, right? And sometimes it's requirements. We have lots of customers, Middle East, where there are regulated corporate government firewalls in place that sometimes won't allow UDP 53, for example, right? and you have to be able to adjust to requirements like that. I always say in our product, and that's a very, very nice example of that, you have so many knobs to fine tune the system that most of us will never ever need. But if you need them, at least we have them, right? And that's one of those examples where there might be a value or requirement where you tune down this highly effective and impactful security feature.
Excellent. Thank you, Gernot, for that. So I think the bottom line is that those various features are made available for troubleshooting, for subtle nuances in networks, like government firewalls or DNS capture, stuff like that. Good response, and I think it's great to have options, right? Can you mix these different options on appliances with the same functions? Can I deploy, one option on one appliance and another option on another appliance and do something there with maybe waiting and receiving traffic? Does that work in the environment?
Yeah, that
You know where I'm going?
as well. But if you get more complex, obviously be aware of what you're doing, right? You might shoot yourself in your foot,
Yeah, fair enough.
which is what we see happen a lot, right? Because, oh, there's a radio button, I can activate that. Let's just do that. And by the way, all over the place in our product, on the right-hand side, literally, there's always a direct link to our admin guide, where you could actually, if you would find the time to do so, read what that stuff is doing, right? And it's a very detailed piece of description, because some of those elements are extremely fine-tuning, right? And most of them you probably will never ever need.
Excellent. That's good stuff, Gernot. I appreciate that. And Justin, anything else to add there? Any last closing thoughts before we wrap this thing up?
I don't think so, Jim. I think Gernot has summarized it very well, and I'm good.
All right. Well, if you don't have a wizarding wand, then you need to get some spa protection for your network. That's all I can say. All right. So that brings us to a conclusion for today's webinar. We've answered all of the questions that were posted in the Q&A panel. If you've got more, you can respond to the email with the attached recording of this video. But in the meantime, if you found this interesting and you'd like to investigate a little further with AppGate, we've got another one of these scheduled for April 23rd. That's next month. That'll be number 4, where our head of our technical advisory services, Arlette Hart, will be joining me in a roundtable discussion talking about thwarting various shifting attack vectors and threats that you may be facing. So it should be a lively discussion with lots of questions and interactions. So come on and join us for that again on April 23rd, and you can register at the URL down below. And finally, if you're really interested in digging a little deeper into AppGate, you're not really a customer yet, we do have a 30-day free trial. We call it the ZTNA free trial. So you can follow that link, appgate.com/ZTNA free trial. Go register for an account. It's a pretty automated deployment. There's some things that you need to do to interact and define what you want to see protected and stuff like that. But it's very well received. We're getting lots of hits on that free trial today, and just go register, give it a shot, see what you think. And with that, we'll close it out. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Gernot. And most importantly, thank you, Ixta, and all of our attendees for jumping on today. It's because of you that we do these things. So keep joining, and we'll try to keep you informed. Thanks, everyone.